Welcome to Discipleship for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human researched and written material.
And you know, the scariest part about modern idolatry is that the people bowing down to it usually think they're being highly scientific.
Oh, absolutely.
They think they're completely rational and completely immune to the mistakes of the past.
Right. When you think about the concept of losing your spiritual way, your mind probably jumps straight to those ancient dusty things.
Like golden calves in the desert.
Exactly. Marble statues in a crumbling temple. Something very literal, very physical, and honestly very safely contained in a history book.
It's easy to judge that.
Yeah, we assume we evolved past the danger of idolatry because we don't, physically kneel in front of carved wood anymore.
It feels like a primitive problem, and it's comforting to frame it that way because it makes us feel like we hold the intellectual high ground.
For sure.
We look back at ancient civilizations and think, how foolish to worship a storm or a statue.
But the reality is, and this is what we're getting into today, the most dangerous idols aren't made of gold or marble at all.
Not at all.
They're made of ink. They are made of algorithms. They are made of wellness trends, carefully curated echo chambers, and this, vague, overarching worship of common sense.
Yeah, we are looking at a modern spiritual landscape that is incredibly deceptive.
So deceptive.
The idols today look like success, they look like health, and they look like being well-informed.
Which brings us to the mission of today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We are taking the piercing observations of G.K. Chesterton, specifically from his classic work Heretics, and holding them up against the ultimate standard.
Right, Jesus Christ's 8 core instructions for discipleship.
Exactly. We're talking about repentance and faith, self-denial, total devotion, humility, the law of love, secret obedience, forgiveness, and fruitfulness.
It's a heavy list, but it's the only standard that matters.
And to you listening right now, whether you're commuting or going for a walk, this deep dive is really about how you navigate a world that desperately wants to put your soul to sleep.
Yeah, a world obsessed with its own self-important logic.
Right. But to understand Chesterton's critique, we first need to understand the world that provoked it. We have to set the scene in Edwardian England, so early 20th century. What is the spiritual temperature of that moment?
The temperature is one of dizzying, arrogant transition.
Okay. Arrogant how?
Well, you have rapid industrialization completely changing the geography of human life. People are moving from agricultural rhythms to factory clocks.
The machine age.
Yeah. And you have the birth of the media baron, the rise of mass journalism printed for millions overnight.
Right. The power of the press just exploding.
Exactly. And intellectually, the upper classes are swept up in scientific rationalism and a new wave of elite neo-paganism. They basically view Christianity as a quaint, outdated mythology that they have happily outgrown.
So they replace the church with the printing press and the microscope.
That is the exact assumption. They assume that because they can measure the physical world more accurately, they've solved the spiritual world.
Right.
They eagerly replace orthodox faith with new isms. They embrace the aesthetic movement, which basically argues that beauty and art are detached from morality.
Which sounds very familiar today.
Doesn't it? And they embrace various simplicity trends, trying to find moral purity in their diets rather than their soul.
Oh, we are definitely going to talk about that.
And, quite darkly, they embrace the pseudoscience of race to justify their political empires. They think they are being tremendously progressive.
And Chesterton is watching all of this unfold. And his response isn't just a polite theological disagreement.
No, it's a battle.
It's a rescue mission. He is desperately trying to pull the human capacity for wonder, for genuine humility, and for real love out of the suffocating grip of this modern materialism.
He recognizes that when you try to tame everything with cold rationalism, you don't actually elevate humanity. You shrink the universe. You make it claustrophobic.
It's like Chesterton is looking at a society that has decided to live entirely inside a sterile, fluorescent-lit office building.
Right.
They've controlled the temperature, they've scheduled the lighting, everything is predictable and safe. And he's trying to smash a window so they can see the terrifying, beautiful thunderstorm outside.
That is such a good analogy. He wants them to remember what awe feels like.
Because awe is the prerequisite for discipleship.
Exactly. And the first window he tries to smash is the media. He goes right after the press and this modern worship of success.
In chapter 8,
yeah.
Right? He targets the new journalism of his day, the massive papers run by magnates like Harmsworth.
Yeah, and the common critique of this new massive media was that it was too sensational, too violent, too vulgar, that it was stirring people up into a frenzy.
But Chesterton flips that completely. He says the exact opposite.
He does.
He says the real vice of this journalism is that it is insupportably tame. It's flat. It's cowardly.
Which sounds crazy until you consider the mechanics of it. He points out that all the lurid headlines, the massive capital letters, the dramatic layout, they aren't there to startle people.
What are they there for then?
They are there to soothe them. He compares it to the giant alphabet blocks we use to teach children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you don't use a massive, brightly colored letter A to scare a child or challenge a child. You use it to make reading incredibly smooth, effortless, and easy.
So the paper is designed for the tired clerk on the dimly lit train who has been drained by the fierceness of modern life.
Exactly. The journalism isn't challenging his assumptions, it's just repeating his casual prejudices back to him in a huge font.
It never attacks anything real or dangerous.
Never. It attacks things that are already a public joke. Safe targets. There is absolutely no moral courage involved.
Because moral courage requires risking failure. And this new journalism is fundamentally built on the worship of success.
Right. It starts by worshiping success and ends in mere mediocrity and timidity.
Okay, I have to pause here because this feels counterintuitive. If I start a newspaper or a business or even plant a church, I want it to succeed.
Sure, of course.
Success means reaching people. How does Chesterton arrive at the conclusion that worshiping success makes you a coward?
It comes down to what serves as your ultimate master. Chesterton argues that if triumph is your only test for whether something is good or true, you will never endure long enough to actually triumph.
Explain that a bit more.
Think about the mechanics of endurance. To be truly strong, to actually succeed in a lasting moral sense, you must defy the status quo. You have to stand your ground when the wind blows against you.
Right.
But if your only metric is being successful, the moment the wind changes, you change your position to accommodate it. You become a weather vane instead of a compass.
Oh, man. He uses that brilliant evolutionary analogy, doesn't he?
The mammoth, yeah.
He says the mammoth didn't put his head on one side and wonder if mammoths were a little out of date. The great elk didn't look at his antlers and say, cloven hoofs are very much worn now.
Right. They just were what they were.
But modern humans are constantly trying to accommodate themselves to the trend of the time.
And the tragic irony, as Chesterton points out, is that the trend of the time is mostly a phantom. It is made up of millions of frightened people, all accommodating themselves to a trend that isn't even real.
That's an illusion.
Yeah, he defines public opinion as public opinion minus his opinion. Everyone surrenders their own deep conviction because they assume the crowd possesses some collective wisdom.
But the crowd is just a collection of individuals doing the exact same thing, surrendering their convictions.
Exactly.
Now, if we hold this up against Jesus's core instruction of total devotion, the conflict is absolute.
It's night and day.
Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters. You must seek first the kingdom of God. If your master is success or relevance or public opinion, you are serving a false master.
Total devotion requires a willingness to fail spectacularly in the eyes of the world.
Right. It requires enduring the cross because your eyes are fixed on a kingdom that doesn't pull well.
And the Edwardian elite had completely abandoned total devotion to the kingdom. They replaced it with a devotion to effectiveness. They loved the aesthetic of action without the substance of truth.
Which perfectly explains that hilarious, biting story he tells about an article in Pearson's magazine.
Oh, the nail hammering.
Yes. The article was praising an American politician, and the evidence of this politician's greatness was that he won votes by literally hammering nails into a board while he spoke.
So absurd.
This was supposed to demonstrate his sound common sense.
It perfectly captures the absurdity of utilitarian idolatry. The crowd praises the noise of the hammer. They love the appearance of a strong, silent man or a practical builder.
But they completely forget to ask the most important question.
Right. What are the nails holding together? Are you building a hospital or are you building a gallows?
Wow. Chesterton summarizes this illusion of common sense by saying, the whole glory and greatness of Mr. Chamberlain consists in this, that if man hits the right nail on the head, nobody cares where he hits it to or what it does.
It's ritualism. It's a mindless worship of process over purpose.
And he sees this exact same mental confusion bleeding into how the culture treats science and human nature, especially in chapters 11 and 13.
Yes, because physical science is fantastic for studying the predictable mechanics of stars or microbes. But it becomes disastrous when it is applied as the sole lens for understanding the human soul.
How so?
Well, Chesterton critiques the anthropologists of his day by pointing out a fatal flaw in their methodology. To understand a spider, a scientist has to suppress his human intuition. He has to view the spider purely mechanically.
Right, and you can't empathize with the spider.
Exactly. But to understand humanity, suppressing your humanity doesn't make you objective. Chesterton says it makes you preternaturally stupid.
And he gives that incredibly funny example about burial rituals.
Oh, I love this one.
The learned anthropologist looks at an ancient tribe and says, these savages put food in graves because they believe the dead can eat. And Chesterton points out how topsy-turvy this logic is. It's like future anthropologists digging up our cemeteries, finding flowers on our graves, and concluding the English in the 20th century believed that a dead man could smell.
It's hilarious, but it highlights the absolute failure of pure rationalism. Why do we put flowers on graves?
Because it is natural, obvious, and deeply emotional.
Exactly. It is an act of irrational love. The moment anything passes through the human mind, it ceases to be a simple, predictable scientific fact and becomes spiritual.
Chesterton says science can analyze a pork chop. It can tell you how much phosphorus or protein is in it.
Yes.
But science cannot analyze a man's wish for a pork chop.
Such a great distinction.
That wish isn't just a biological imperative. It is tied up in custom, nervous fancy, memory, the joy of a shared table, and a haunting love of the beautiful.
He argues that the desire for a pork chop is just as mystical as the desire for heaven, because a spiritual being is doing the desiring.
So any attempt to make a hard, predictable science out of human sociology or folklore is going to fail.
Because humans aren't predictable pebbles. We are living, growing reeds. We possess free will and spiritual depth.
And when a society forgets this, when it tries to reduce humans to biological data points, it almost always leads to oppression.
Every time.
Which directly connects to the idol of race that Chesterton attacks. He watches the wealthy English ruling class making a ludicrous, cruel mess of governing Ireland.
And we are reporting his views here, but he points out that instead of repenting or admitting their political failure, they invent a pseudo-scientific defense.
Right. They start talking about Celts and Teutons.
Yes. They use the shifting sands of ethnology to justify their oppression. They turn race into an absurd deity.
And Chesterton points out that nationality has nothing to do with biological race.
Right. He says nationality is a spiritual product. It's a moment of shared sacrifice and shared love where 5 men become a 6th man.
People will die for the spiritual concept of a nation, but no one will die for a meridian of Greenwich or a specific blood percentage.
Exactly. And he points out the historical reality that Ireland absorbed the Normans, the Scots, the Spaniards. Nationality in its weakness was stronger than ethnology in its strength. The idea of race was just a convenient shield.
And this raises a profound tension with Jesus' instruction for repentance.
A huge tension.
Because repentance demands taking radical responsibility for our sins, our failures, and our abuses of power. The ruling class in Edwardian England used the language of science and race to avoid repentance.
They used long academic words to cover the errors of the rich and powerful. They built ideological shields to protect their egos from the painful light of conviction.
The ego is really the root of the problem here, isn't it?
It is the absolute core of it.
Having torn down these external idols of the Tame Press, the false common sense of the nail-hammering politicians, and the pseudoscience of the anthropologists, Chesterton turns the mirror inward.
Because why do all these modern philosophies ultimately fail?
Because they enthrone the self. I want to look closely at this fascinating distinction he makes in Chapter 9 between pride and vanity. He uses the writers George Moore and Robert Louis Stevenson as his case studies.
Yeah, so George Moore had written a book of personal confessions, and Chesterton zeroes in on a profound spiritual sickness in Moore's work.
What was the sickness?
Chesterton argues that Moore doesn't dislike the Catholic Church because he objects to its theology or its miracles. He dislikes it because it demands he believe in the actual independent existence of other people.
Wow.
Yeah. Moore's real quarrel with life is that it is not a dream he can completely mold to his own temperament.
He lives in a house of looking glasses. Everywhere he looks, he just wants to see himself reflected back.
Exactly.
And here Chesterton makes a distinction that completely shifted my perspective. We tend to lump pride and vanity together as the same sin, but he argues they are mechanically different.
Very different.
Stevenson was vain, Moore is proud, and vanity, Chesterton says, is actually much wiser and more vigorous than pride.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that. Why is vanity healthier?
Yeah, why?
Because vanity is inherently social. The vain person desperately wants applause from infinite multitudes of other people.
Okay, so they need an audience.
Right, which means the vain person acknowledges that other people exist and that their opinions matter. The vain person is active, humorous, and can even enjoy the joke of themselves if it gets a laugh.
It's the difference between a golden retriever who desperately wants you to clap for its tricks and a cat staring at a mirror, completely ignoring the world entirely.
I love that analogy.
The golden retriever is vain, it's a bit needy, it wants attention, but it's social and engaged. The cat staring at the mirror is proud.
Yes. Pride is solitary, it is uncivilized. Pride is passive, desiring only the applause of one person itself, which it already has.
Chesterton points out that pride is dull and cannot even smile. Stevenson could amuse us with his vanity because he understood that the secret of life lies in laughter and humility.
He has this great quote, "Self is the Gorgon. Vanity sees it in the mirror of other men and lives. Pride studies it for itself and is turned to stone."
And you see the result in their art. Right. Because Moore is so paralyzingly self-conscious, he destroys any chance of actual self-revelation.
By trying to be the whole universe, his real personality vanishes.
Chesterton jokes that reading Moore is like walking through a gallery of fine landscape paintings where the artist forced himself into every single scene.
The Grand Canal with a distant view of Mr. Moore.
Ruins of Mr. Moore by moonlight.
Seen through my temperament, the day appeared fine. It's an exhausting way to live.
It really is.
And the psychological reality here is that thinking about yourself all the time leads to trying to absorb the universe into your ego, which leads to ceasing to be anything distinct at all.
But if you just focus on the universe, if you forget yourself, you will naturally think about it in your own individual way. You actually become a unique person by accident.
This is the very essence of Jesus' call to self-denial and humility.
Right. Jesus said that whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for his sake will find it.
We often treat that as just a theological transaction for the afterlife, but Chesterton is showing that it's a psychological reality right now.
The pagan philosophers set out with admirable logical sense to enjoy themselves.
Right.
But by the end of their civilization, they discovered that a man who is only focused on enjoying himself eventually loses the capacity to enjoy anything else.
The great discovery of Christianity was that whereas people supposed the fullest enjoyment comes from extending our ego to infinity, making everything about us, the truth is that the fullest possible enjoyment is found by reducing our ego to zero.
Because humility is the mechanism that perpetually puts us back in the primal darkness, where every flash of light is startling and instantaneous.
It's the cure for being weary of wonders.
Yes.
Chesterton says the curse that came before history has made us tired of the sun. We see it for the 100th time and call it the light of common day.
Our ego makes us demand a blue sun or a green sun to keep us entertained.
But to the truly humble man, the sun is actually a sun. It is a terrifying burning ball of fire in the sky, and he is astonished by it.
When the humble man looks at faces in the street, he realizes with a dramatic pleasure that they are not dead.
The ego blinds us with boredom. Self-denial restores our vision.
The proud man is trapped in a sterile room. The humble man lives in a perpetual state of astonishment and gratitude.
Which forces us to ask, if reducing the ego is the goal, how do we actually do it?
Right, because modern society always has a shortcut for this, and it almost always takes the form of manufactured asceticism.
Yes. Chesterton addresses this head-on in his essay on Sandals and Simplicity, attacking the simple life fads of his day.
In Chapter 10, he is looking directly at the followers of Tolstoy and various other purity movements.
They advocated for vegetarianism, wearing coarse clothing, and eating raw foods as a way to achieve spiritual enlightenment.
But Chesterton notices a glaring mechanical hypocrisy in their approach.
Oh, absolutely. They want to make us simple in the things that do not matter, our diet, our costume, our etiquette. But they make us incredibly complex in the things that actually do matter.
Like our philosophy, our spiritual acceptance, our loyalties.
Right. He paints this incredibly vivid picture of a man approaching, wearing sandals, holding a raw tomato firmly in his right hand and declaring, "The affections of family and country alike are hindrances to the fuller development of human love."
And the plain thinker just looks at him and realizes, What a massive amount of trouble you must have taken in order to feel like that.
It's completely unnatural.
You are eating a raw vegetable, but you've had to perform mental gymnastics to convince yourself it's a sin to love your own family.
They've just moved their obsession from wealth to their own digestive tracts.
Chesterton argues that it doesn't matter much if a man eats a grilled tomato or a plain tomato. What matters is whether he eats a plain tomato with a grilled mind.
That is the crucial point. The only kind of simplicity worth preserving is the simplicity of the heart.
The motto of the Simple Life movement was plain living and high thinking. But Chesterton flips it.
He says what society actually needs is high living and plain thinking.
A little high living, a feast, a banquet, a celebration would teach them the meaning of human festivity.
It would remind them that ritual and joy are older and deeper than their harsh, fanciful ethics.
It takes a very complicated, highly civilized, tangled brain to truly believe that it's evil to love your country or to defend the weak.
He argues that nothing is more materialistic than despising a pleasure simply because it is material.
The true test of a disciple is whether they retain the virginity of the spirit, which enjoys the world with astonishment and fear.
He refuses the devilish vision of a child who is too simple to like toys.
A healthy child sees everything, both natural and artificial, with simple pleasure. The tree and the lamppost are both supernatural to a child because both are unexplained and splendid.
The sin of the industrial age isn't that engines are mechanical.
Right.
The sin is that men have become mechanical. We've lost the poetry of existence.
And if we look at how this aligns with Jesus' instructions, it connects perfectly to total devotion and secret obedience.
Chesterton actually quotes Jesus directly here, referencing the Sermon on the Mount. Take no thought what you shall eat or what you shall drink.
Chesterton notes that Jesus isn't just giving spiritual advice. He is giving superlatively good hygiene.
If he harnesses his wagon to a star, the process will have a most satisfactory effect upon the coats of his stomach.
That line is brilliant.
Rationalizing about practical, immediate things like health is spiritually perilous. It makes you obsessed with your own pores and digestion.
You become the center of your universe again.
Total devotion means your eyes are on the kingdom, and all these things shall be added unto you.
The manufactured asceticism of the sandal wearers is often just vanity in a different costume.
It's an attempt to save oneself through dietary legalism, rather than relying on the grace of the kingdom.
You are meant to do your spiritual work in secret, without the performative sandals and the public raw tomato eating.
Exactly. If the Simple Life guys are obsessing over raw tomatoes, they haven't actually escaped complexity at all.
And if scientific rationalism strips away our humanity, where does that leave us?
Well, Chesterton realized that logic and rationality had led society to a dead end. We need something else to survive.
Which brings us to his debate with Mr. Lowes Dickinson and the neo-pagans regarding the rational virtues versus the Christian paradoxes. This is in chapter 12.
Right. So Dickinson was a prominent thinker who argued that paganism was an ideal of full and satisfied humanity, while Christianity was merely a gloomy asceticism that suppressed human flourishing.
But Chesterton completely dismantles this historical premise. He points out the primary fact everyone forgets: Christianity came after paganism.
The pagan world didn't fall because it was conquered by some outside force. It fell because it reached its logical end and found it wanting.
The pagan virtues, things like justice and temperance, are entirely rational. But Chesterton points out that they are ultimately sad.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that sadness. Why does rationality lead to despair?
Yeah, why?
Think about the math of pure justice. Justice consists of finding out what is due to a man and giving it to him.
Okay.
If a man works a day, you pay him a day's wage. If a man commits a crime, you punish him. It is perfectly reasonable. But if humans are inherently flawed, if we all inevitably fail, then the pure math of justice means we are all doomed. A perfectly just society is a society where everyone eventually goes to jail.
Wow. That is exactly why pure reason is insufficient for the human soul.
Exactly. Christianity intervened not by rejecting justice, but by introducing three mystical virtues: faith, hope, and charity.
And Chesterton says these are the gay, exuberant virtues. But the catch is they are entirely unreasonable. They are paradoxes.
Contrast justice with charity. If justice is giving a man what he deserves, charity means pardoning what is unpardonable.
If an offense is pardonable, forgiving it is just fairness.
Right. Charity is specifically for the undeserving. It breaks the math.
Which perfectly mirrors Jesus' law of love and his command for forgiveness. We are told to love our enemies.
Loving your friends is rational. It's a mutual exchange of benefits. It's what the pagans do.
But loving your enemy is a paradox. It denies arithmetic.
And then consider hope. The rational pagan is cheerful when the prospects are bright. If the army is winning, you have hope.
But the Christian virtue of hope only truly exists when things are hopeless.
As Chesterton profoundly states, exactly at the instant when hope ceases to be reasonable, it begins to be useful.
It's the supernatural power of being cheerful in circumstances we know to be desperate. The virtue of hope exists only in earthquake and eclipse.
And faith. Everybody mocks faith as believing what we know to be untrue. But Chesterton says it's simply believing the incredible.
It's maintaining a certainty about something we cannot empirically prove, like believing in the inherent dignity of a broken human soul.
Chesterton argues that these paradoxes were discovered because Christian civilization had to discover them or die.
The old pagan world went perfectly straight forward on the path of reason until it discovered that going straight forward is an enormous mistake for the human heart.
Right.
Okay, I have to push back hard here because this sounds incredibly risky.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we celebrate unreasonableness, aren't we just endorsing fanaticism? If we throw out reason and arithmetic, don't we end up with chaos, cults, and people doing terrible things because they claim they have faith that defies logic?
That is the perpetual danger, and it's a vital pushback. But Chesterton isn't advocating for stupidity or a complete rejection of the intellect.
He's not.
No, he is defining the limits of reason. Reason is a tool, not a destination. He says, mankind has discovered that reason does not lead to sanity.
It's a bold claim.
It is, but if you only follow pure logic, you end up in the sterile room with Mr. Moore, or you end up in the despair of pure justice.
Right.
It is the stress of ultimate need and a terrible knowledge of things as they are that led men to set up these riddles and die for them.
So reason gets us to the edge of the cliff, but we need the parachute of the paradox to survive the fall.
Exactly. Charity is a reverent agnosticism towards the complexity of the soul.
The pagan world was clean and obvious. A good man was good, a bad man was bad. But the Christian sees the complexity, the lingering image of God, even in the most broken person.
Which is exactly why the Christian world invented the novel. Romance consists in thinking a thing more delightful because it is dangerous. We have to forgive the sins that are like scarlet.
If we evaluate this against Jesus' instruction on fruitfulness, the fruit of a disciple's character is born out of these exact paradoxes.
You cannot produce the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, purely through rational deduction. They require the supernatural intervention of grace.
So we take these lofty virtues, charity, humility, hope, and we bring them crashing down into the most practical, difficult, gritty arena of all.
The modern home.
Yes. In chapter 14, on certain modern writers and the institution of the family, he launches into a brilliant, completely counterintuitive defense of the family.
He says the common defense of the family is that it is peaceful and pleasant. But his defense is that the family is good precisely because it is not peaceful and not pleasant.
It is a stunning sociological observation. He contrasts the modern clique with the ancient clan.
In a large, highly civilized society like London or New York, we have the luxury of choosing our companions.
We form groups based entirely on sympathy. We find people who think exactly like us, read the same books, have the same politics, and share the same tax bracket.
This is the clique.
And Chesterton says a big society is actually a machinery for the purpose of promoting narrowness.
A society for the prevention of Christian knowledge?
Because in a clique, you never have to compromise. You never have to face genuine disagreement. You just curate your friends until your world is a comfortable echo chamber.
But the clan, the small community, the village, or the physical family is completely different.
You don't choose them.
They are chosen for you. In the clan, everyone might wear the same tartan or share the same last name, but in their souls, there are a million different colors.
You have the radical socialist, the staunch conservative, the artist, and the accountant, all forced to eat turkey at the same table.
The modern person is constantly trying to escape the friction of the street they live on.
They invent modern hygiene and travel to seaside resorts like Margate. They invent imperialism and travel to Timbuktu.
They pretend they are fleeing their suburban street because it is dull, but Chesterton says they are lying.
They are fleeing because the street is too exacting. It is too demanding because it is alive.
Think about why we travel to exotic places. We go there because the people there are basically scenery to us.
A man can stare at foreign cultures because, to him, they are passive objects.
But if he stares at the old lady in the next garden, she becomes active. The camel in the desert won't sneer at you, but the cultured gentleman at number 5 will absolutely sneer at you for your lawn decor.
The major at number 9 will roar with laughter if you don't smoke.
Exactly. The people in our own street are free men, perverse, personal, deliberately different from ourselves.
We dread them not because of their narrowness, but because of their superb tendency to broaden our horizon. We don't want to be broadened. We want to be comfortable.
This brings us right to the burning heart of Jesus' law of love. Why did the old scriptural language constantly speak of our duty toward our neighbor rather than our duty toward humanity?
Chesterton points out that loving humanity is easy because humanity is an abstraction.
Loving humanity can be a hobby. We can choose to work in a specific cause because we like the people or we enjoy the work. We can love a distant demographic because it's a theoretical exercise that doesn't interrupt our dinner.
But we have to love our neighbor simply because he is there. He is the actual unedited sample of humanity given to us.
Chesterton writes, he is a symbol because he is an accident.
That is a heavy, beautiful thought. Loving the idea of humanity is easy. Loving the guy next door who plays his music too loud or the uncle who posts terrible political memes is the actual cross we have to bear.
It forces us out of our ego and into the agonizingly hard work of true humility and charity. The family works the exact same way.
It is a good institution because it is uncongenial.
It contains divergencies. Brother George is interested in restaurants, not your religious difficulties. Uncle Henry disapproves of your career, and Elizabeth is completely unreasonable.
They're just like mankind.
If you try to flee the family to find a clique of people who only agree with you, you are stepping into a narrower, more diluted world.
Chesterton says the supreme romantic adventure isn't falling in love, because we choose who we fall in love with to some degree.
The supreme adventure is being born.
There we do walk suddenly into a splendid and startling trap. Our father and mother do lie in wait for us and leap out on us like brigands from a bush.
We stepped into a fairy tale. It's a world we didn't make, with characters we didn't cast.
And this is why life is a novel written by a divine will. We don't have control over the plot.
If we had control over everything, as the rich often try to have, life becomes incredibly dull and tame. True adventure requires limitations. It requires meeting things we do not like and did not expect.
Which means the friction in your physical family or your local church isn't a distraction from your discipleship. It is your discipleship.
It's the crucible where the paradoxes of charity and humility are actually forged.
But you know, as much as I love Chesterton's brilliance here, we have to view his text critically. As thoughtful mentors, we have to ask, where does his approach chafe against the core instructions of Jesus? Where are the gaps and tensions?
Well, the first tension that leaps off the page is his tone.
Yeah.
Chesterton is incredibly pugnacious.
He loves a good fight.
He does. He openly admits to his Irish pugnacity and seems to revel in it. He absolutely eviscerates his opponents, Mr. Pearson, George Moore, the Tolstoyans.
He mocks Pearson's name, calling him Chilperic. He calls the work of his rivals bad butter.
It's hilarious and it's brilliant rhetoric, but we have to ask how this squares with Jesus' command to love our enemies and bless those who curse us.
It's a real problem. Jesus commands the law of love, treating others as you wish to be treated, praying for persecutors. Chesterton is engaging in the blood sport of Edwardian intellectual debate.
He destroys his opponent's arguments by making them look utterly ridiculous.
For a disciple reading this today, we have to be careful not to confuse argumentative victory with spiritual fruitfulness. You can win a debate, humiliate your opponent, and completely fail the law of love.
We cannot adopt the mockery just because we agree with the theology.
Absolutely.
Another significant tension is his defense of high living. He champions burgundy, cigars, and hansom cabs as a joyful rebellion against the joyless, sandal-wearing Tolstoyans.
We understand his point rejecting sterile legalism is necessary to maintain the wonder of creation. But does this cross a line into self-indulgence?
It definitely risks ignoring Jesus' instruction on self-denial and cross-bearing. Chesterton swings the pendulum so hard against manufactured asceticism that he risks glossing over biblical self-denial.
Jesus didn't just say, don't be a legalist. He said, take up your cross daily.
There is a genuine, agonizing cost to following Christ that involves restricting our fleshly desires, fasting, and suffering.
We must deeply discern the difference between enjoying God's creation with gratitude and using anti-legalism as an excuse for spiritual laxity.
We also have to weigh his public posture against Jesus' instruction for secret obedience.
Oh, that's a great point.
Jesus explicitly says acts of devotion, fasting, and prayer should be done in secret. But journalism, public debate, and publishing are inherently loud and performative.
Chesterton is hammering his own nails on the public board, so to speak. While public truth-telling is necessary, prophets spoke publicly. After all, the modern disciple must balance this with the quiet, unseen devotion Jesus demands.
If our entire faith is lived out in the comments section, in public debates, or on social media feeds, we are violating the instruction of secret obedience.
The roots of the tree must be underground, in the dark, if the fruit is going to be genuine.
So how do we read him well? We read with deep discernment. We embrace Chesterton's profound insights on the danger of the ego, the necessity of humility, the beautiful paradox of the Christian virtues, and the sacred trap of the unchosen neighbor.
But we must filter his combative debate style and his Edwardian cultural assumptions through the gentle, serving heart of Christ.
We let Chesterton wake us up to the wonder of the world, but we let Jesus dictate how we treat the people in it.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener, tomorrow morning? Let's translate this ancient message into 21st century Christian life.
Because if Chesterton thought Edwardian London was a machine for creating narrow cliques, he couldn't have possibly imagined the terrifying efficiency of the digital algorithm.
The modern believer lives inside the ultimate click machine.
Our social media feeds, our news algorithms, and our streaming platforms are meticulously designed to ensure we never encounter the friction of an unchosen neighbor.
The technology tracks our sympathies and feeds us a constant stream of agreement.
We are perpetually tempted to curate our reality so that we never have to face an idea that challenges us or a person who annoys us.
We even do this with our faith. We church shop until we find a group that perfectly mirrors our own sociological preferences, our own musical tastes, and our own political leanings.
We are trying to build the exact house of looking glasses that George Moore lived in. We want the universe to just be a reflection of our temperament.
But Jesus calls us to shatter the mirrors.
It really forces you to ask yourself if you're trying to expand your ego to infinity, seeking total control and constant affirmation from your curated environment.
Or are you actively trying to reduce your ego to zero, embracing humility so that you can actually see the world and serve the people in it?
It's so easy for us to retreat into these digital echo chambers. The practical challenge here is to step outside of it.
Lean into the uncomfortable friction of your physical family, your local neighborhood, or your local church.
When Uncle Henry annoys you, or that one person in your small group drives you crazy with their opinions, don't flee to the digital Margate.
Don't block them or mute them. Practice the specific Christian paradox of charity. Pardon the unpardonable.
Recognize that the friction is the exact sandpaper God is using to shape your discipleship.
Another crucial area for reflection is where we place our trust. Are you treating your physical health, your diet, your exercise routine, or your political alignment as your primary religion?
Are you taking anxious thought for tomorrow, rationalizing your life away, and forgetting to seek first the kingdom?
True simplicity isn't an aesthetic choice of clothing or organic food. It is a singular, total devotion of the heart to Jesus Christ.
Harness your wagon to a star. Stop obsessing over the mechanics of your life and fix your eyes on the kingdom.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. We talked at the beginning about that sterile, fluorescent-lit office building where everything is controlled and predictable.
Right, and smashing the window.
And how Chesterton is trying to smash the window so you can see the storm outside. If life truly is a novel written by a divine will, as Chesterton suggests, then the plot twists you are currently trying to escape, the difficult neighbor, the unexpected financial strain, the family drama, the physical limitation, might actually be the exact chapters designed to forge your discipleship.
That is so true.
The storm outside isn't there to destroy you. It's there to wake you up. Stop trying to seize the author's pen. Let God write the story and step into the romantic, terrifying adventure of being a disciple in the world he made.
That's the heart of this section. This is discipleship for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.